when I imagine somebody lifting Madeleine out of a bed, and I imagine Madeleine at some point waking up, and it's so horrific that I just, your brain struggles to accept it as real.
Close your eyes for a moment and imagine it. A 3-year-old child lifted silently out of her bed in the dead of night. Now, imagine her suddenly waking, small hands reaching instinctively for the soft toy she never let go of. The very thought is unbearable, so terrifying that the human mind resists believing it could be real. Yet, for nearly 18 years, this has been the chilling reality haunting millions around the world, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. At the center of this tragedy lies not only the missing child, but also a silent witness, an unassuming pink-stuffed cat known as Cuddle Cat. To most, it looked like nothing more than a child's comfort object, soft and harmless. But, in this case, it became something else entirely. The object of suspicion, the spark for controversy, and perhaps the one thing that carried the truth all along. In the days after Madeleine vanished, the world watched her mother, Kate McCann, clutching Cuddle Cat tightly during press conferences, holding it as if the faded fabric itself could keep her daughter's memory alive. To many, it was an image of heartbreaking grief, a mother refusing to let go of the last piece of her child. Yet soon, that very image began to fracture, because when cadaver dogs later detected the unmistakable scent of death on the toy, the narrative of abduction was shaken to its core. Why had Madeleine disappeared, but her most beloved toy remained neatly placed on her bed? Why, just weeks later, did Kate wash the very object that could have preserved her daughter's DNA? These details may seem trivial, but in the realm of forensic investigation, they are anything but. The story of Cuddle Cat is not simply about a toy. It is about innocence and suspicion colliding in one object. It is about the cracks in an official narrative and the haunting possibility that this soft, pink stuffed animal may have been the only witness to what really happened on that May night in 2007. And as the years stretch on, one question still lingers. Could Cuddle Cat have carried the secret the world has been searching for all along? From the very beginning, Cuddle Cat was more than just fabric and stuffing. For 3-year-old Madeleine McCann, it was a lifeline, an inseparable companion she carried everywhere. Family photos show her tiny arms wrapped around the pink stuffed toy, dragging it along the floor, clutching it as she drifted to sleep. In the ordinary lives of young children, such objects symbolize comfort, safety, and innocence. But in this case, the toy soon became something else, the centerpiece of suspicion. When Madeleine vanished on the night of May 3, 2007, Cuddle Cat did not vanish with her. Instead, it remained neatly placed on her bed in apartment 5A of the Ocean Club Resort in Praia de Luz. To detectives, this detail spoke volumes. Experienced investigators of child abductions often note that kidnappers tend to take whatever a child clings to most, blankets, dolls, stuffed toys, because they want silence, not screaming. Leaving Cuddle Cat behind risked a struggle, tears, or cries loud enough to wake the household. Its presence on the bed was therefore deeply unsettling. In the days that followed, Kate McCann was rarely seen without Cuddle Cat. Cameras captured her gripping it during press conferences, prayer vigils, and public appearances. To the outside world, the sight was heartbreaking, a devastated mother holding on to the last tangible piece of her child. But as the weeks passed, what had once evoked pure sympathy began to raise darker questions. Was the toy merely a symbol of grief, or could it also be evidence? By July 2007, British cadaver dogs were brought to Portugal to assist the struggling investigation. Eddie, trained to detect the scent of human decomposition, and Keela, trained to detect traces of blood, were unleashed on the McCann's belongings. Their task was simple: indicate whether death had ever touched the items. What happened next would ignite one of the most explosive controversies of the entire case. Eddie, the cadaver dog, approached Cuddle Cat, by then kept in the McCann's second rental apartment, weeks after Madeleine's disappearance. His reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He barked, sat, and pawed at the toy, the trained signals for the scent of human remains. This was not the original crime scene, nor the child's bedroom. This was a different apartment, 24 days after the night Madeleine vanished, and yet According to Eddie, Cuddle Cat still carried the odor of death. The implications were staggering. If true, this would mean the toy had been in direct contact with a decomposing body, likely Madeleine's. It was not only Cuddle Cat. Eddie also alerted to Kate McCann's clothing and to the key of the family's rental car. To investigators, a chilling pattern emerged. 3 separate items, all linked to Kate, marked by the scent of death. Suddenly, what had seemed like a tragic case of abduction now carried the heavy shadow of suspicion. From that moment, Cuddle Cat was no longer just a stuffed toy. It became evidence, it became a symbol, and it became the silent object through which the story of Madeleine McCann began to unravel. The reaction of the Cadaver dogs sent shockwaves through the investigation. For months, the world had been told a simple story, that Madeleine had been abducted by an intruder through the bedroom window. But if Cuddle Cat bore the unmistakable scent of death, then the foundation of that story began to crumble. Investigators were forced to confront a darker possibility. Perhaps Madeleine had never left the apartment alive. The theory seemed unthinkable at first. Kate and Jerry McCann had presented themselves as grieving parents desperately searching for their missing child. Their faces had been splashed across newspapers, their appeals broadcast around the globe. The public rallied behind them, offering sympathy and donations to support the search. Yet, behind the cameras, doubts were taking shape. Why did the dog alert specifically to items tied to Kate? Why did Madeleine's favorite toy, found on the bed she supposedly vanished from, carry the same signal? One possible explanation emerged. If Madeleine had died accidentally in the apartment, whether through a fall, an overdose of medication, or another mishap, then Cuddle Cat may have been placed near her body, absorbing the scent. Later, when her parents staged the scene of an abduction, the toy was carefully returned to the bed, a small but deliberate prop meant to suggest she had been carried off while asleep. In this scenario, the abduction narrative was not only false, it was a cover-up. To the Portuguese police, this was no longer just a hypothesis. The Cadaver dog's alerts seemed to support it. When Eddie barked at Kate's clothing, suspicions deepened. Could she have carried her daughter's body? When he alerted to the car key, investigators feared the vehicle had been used to transport Madeleine after her death. The chilling image of a mother holding her child's favorite toy in public now took on a more sinister undertone. Was she unknowingly clutching the very evidence that betrayed her? Still, there was a problem. Cadaver dogs, no matter how skilled, are not infallible. They can detect the scent of human decomposition, but they cannot say whose it is, how long ago it was left, or how it was transferred. Forensic scientists urge caution. Eddie had an extraordinary record, but a dog's bark could never be considered absolute proof in court. Suspicion alone was not enough. Yet, suspicion was enough to shift the course of the case. By September 2007, both Kate and Jerry McCann were officially declared suspects. Public opinion fractured. Some clung to the belief that the parents were victims of tragedy. Others began to believe the unthinkable, that Madeleine had died in apartment 5A, and her parents were hiding the truth. From that moment, the stuffed toy once associated with innocence became a symbol of doubt. Cuddle Cat was no longer just a relic of comfort. It was the beginning of suspicion. On July 12, 2007, just over 2 months after Madeleine vanished, Kate McCann made a decision that would ignite one of the most heated debates in the entire case. She washed Cuddle Cat. At first glance, the act seemed innocent, even trivial. Parents wash their children's toys all the time. After weeks of being carried through press conferences, interviews, and long days under the Algarve sun, the pink stuffed cat had grown grimy. Kate later explained in her memoir that it was covered in dust, sunscreen, sweat, and the dirt of constant handling. To her, it felt unhygienic, and cleaning it seemed harmless. But in the highly charged atmosphere of a global missing child investigation, nothing about Cuddle Cat was ordinary. This was the last object Madeleine had clutched before she disappeared. To investigators, it was not just a toy. It was a potential goldmine of forensic evidence. It might have preserved her DNA, traces of her skin cells, or even bodily fluids. And yet, just weeks after Cadaver dogs had already alerted to the scent of death on the toy, Kate chose to put it in the washing machine. For the Portuguese police, the timing was damning. Why had she carried the toy everywhere for 2 months without cleaning it, only to wash it immediately after the dogs reacted? To them, the act looked less like housekeeping and more like destruction of evidence. One senior officer put it bluntly: why would a mother clean the last trace of her missing child unless she had something to hide? The public, too, was divided. Supporters of the McCanns saw Kate's decision as understandable, even human. A grieving mother clinging to her child's toy might want it to be clean, soft, and comforting. Trauma can drive irrational actions. The desire for order in the chaos of loss is a natural coping mechanism. To them, Kate was not erasing evidence. She was preserving her sanity. But critics saw it differently. To them, washing Cuddle Cat symbolized the very heart of suspicion. Parents of missing children often guard every item their child touched, refusing to disturb anything that might later help investigators. The idea that Kate laundered the one object most closely tied to Madeleine struck many as incomprehensible, if not incriminating. This single act hardened the divide. For some, it was the moment sympathy gave way to doubt. For others, it was proof that Kate and Jerry were being unfairly vilified. Internet forums exploded. Documentaries replayed the decision endlessly, and the washing of Cuddle Cat became one of the case's most hotly debated details. In the eyes of investigators like Gonzalo Amaral, this was more than coincidence. He later wrote in The Truth of the Lie that the laundering of the toy crystallized his belief that the McCanns were concealing what really happened. To him, Kate was not a desperate mother, but someone eliminating forensic traces before science could reveal the truth. From that day forward, Cuddle Cat was no longer just a symbol of comfort. It became a symbol of contradiction, an object both shield and weapon, both grief and guilt. As the debate over Cuddle Cat deepened, investigators, journalists, and the public began to form competing hypotheses about what the toy truly represented. Each theory seemed to reveal not only a possible explanation for Madeleine's disappearance, but also the biases of those who believed it. Hypothesis 1. Direct contact with Madeleine's body. The most chilling possibility was that Cuddle Cat had been in physical contact with Madeleine after her death. Supporters of this view pointed directly to Eddie, the Cadaver dog, who alerted multiple times to the toy, even weeks after the disappearance and in a different apartment. Trained to detect the chemical compounds released during human decomposition, Eddie's signal suggested that the stuffed animal had absorbed the scent because it had lain near Madeleine's body. If true, this implied that she died in apartment 5A, and that her death was hidden rather than reported. Hypothesis 2. The toy was washed to destroy evidence. The second theory flowed naturally from the first. If Cuddle Cat had indeed carried incriminating traces, DNA, blood, or the cadaver scent, then Kate's decision to wash it after the dog alerts could be seen as a deliberate act of evidence destruction. To the police, the sequence was too suspicious. Eddie barked, and shortly thereafter, the toy was laundered. For those who supported this hypothesis, the wash was not housekeeping, but cover-up. Hypothesis 3. Cuddle Cat was purely a symbol of comfort. Not everyone believed in sinister interpretations. To many, the toy was nothing more than Madeleine's beloved possession, clutched by Kate in her grief. Parents of missing children often hold on to clothes, toys, or blankets to preserve a sense of closeness. Washing the toy, in this light, was an ordinary act of a mother who needed her daughter's comfort object to be clean and huggable, not contaminated by sweat and dirt. This theory framed the suspicion as cruel overreach against two devastated parents. Hypothesis 4. Transfer scent from Kate's medical work. In her defense, Kate herself suggested another explanation. As a general practitioner, she argued, she had contact with deceased patients during her work in the UK. The odor of decomposition might have transferred from her hands, clothing, or belongings onto Cuddle Cat. Forensic scientists acknowledge that cadaver scent molecules are potent and persistent, but critics question whether a GP in routine practice would be exposed to decomposition strong enough to contaminate personal items weeks later and still trigger a dog. Hypothesis 5. Environmental contamination. The final hypothesis pointed away from both Madeleine and her parents. Could the scent have come from spoiled food, garbage, or other organic material? While cadaver dogs are specifically trained to distinguish human remains from other odors, skeptics argued that contamination could not be entirely ruled out. In the end, the hypotheses split into two camps. Hypotheses 1 and 2 fueled the accident and cover-up theory, suggesting Madeleine died in the apartment and her parents concealed it. Hypotheses 3, 4, and 5 defended the idea of misinterpreted evidence, that suspicion blinded investigators, and that Cuddle Cat was never incriminating at all. The divide was absolute, and the toy became the battlefield. For some, it was the silent witness to a hidden death. For others, it was merely a tragic relic weaponized by suspicion. If the investigators saw Cuddle Cat as possible evidence, the media transformed it into something even larger, a cultural icon of the case. From the earliest days, photographs of Kate McCann clutching the pink stuffed toy circulated across Europe and beyond. At first, newspapers framed the image as a symbol of grief, portraying Kate as a mother desperately clinging to the last, tangible connection with her missing child. Headlines spoke of heartbreak, and television segments used the toy as a visual reminder of innocence lost. But sympathy soon gave way to scrutiny. By late summer of 2007, as the Cadaver dog alerts became public, the very same images were recast in a sinister light. Commentators began to ask whether Kate's constant appearances with Cuddle Cat were entirely spontaneous, or whether they were staged. Some media outlets suggested that advisors may have encouraged her to hold the toy during interviews, deliberately framing her as the archetypal grieving mother. What once evoked empathy now risked being interpreted as manipulation. The contradiction was stark. In one photograph, the toy symbolized resilience, a mother refusing to let go. In another headline, it was described as carrying the scent of a corpse. This clash between comfort and suspicion fueled endless speculation. For supporters of the McCanns, the press was cruel, turning private sorrow into public accusation. For critics, the coverage confirmed what they already believed, that the toy revealed deception. The power of the media was undeniable. By emphasizing Cuddle Cat in every frame, journalists didn't just reflect suspicion, they amplified it. Soon, Portuguese investigators were compelled to treat the toy not merely as a symbol, but as potential evidence, seizing and testing it largely because of the media spotlight. In this way, public perception actively shaped the course of the investigation. For Kate, the consequences were deeply personal. What she experienced as comfort was interpreted by millions as either moving or manipulative. Cuddle Cat became a mirror, reflecting whatever the observer already believed: grief or guilt, authenticity or performance. And once the transformation took place, there was no turning back. Nearly 2 decades have passed since that night in Praia da Luz, and yet the mystery of Madeleine McCann remains as unresolved as ever. And through it all, one small object continues to haunt the case: a pink stuffed cat that cannot speak, yet carries the weight of endless speculation. Cuddle Cat has been everything at once: an innocent child's toy, a mother's comfort, a suspected piece of forensic evidence, and a lightning rod for controversy. It has been barked at by cadaver dogs, photographed by journalists, seized by police, and dissected in documentaries. But for all the noise surrounding it, the toy itself remains silent, and that silence has forced the world to fill the void with theories, doubts, and accusations. If Cuddle Cat truly absorbed the scent of death, then it was the closest we ever came to uncovering the truth of what happened to Madeleine. If it was washed deliberately, then it was the erasure of possibility, the destruction of evidence that could have changed the course of the case. But if it was only ever a comfort object, caught in the storm of suspicion, then it stands as a tragic symbol of how grief can be misinterpreted, weaponized, and turned against the very people who suffer it most. The paradox is cruel. To investigators like Gonçalo Amaral, the toy symbolized concealment, a detail that crystallized the belief that Madeleine died in the apartment. To supporters of the McCanns, it symbolized devotion, a mother's refusal to let go of the last trace of her child. To the media, it became both prop and proof, depending on the narrative of the day. And to the public, it became a mirror, reflecting whatever they already believed about the case. Today, Cuddle Cat is remembered not for what it truly was, but for what it represents: uncertainty. In every photograph of Kate clutching it, what we see is not just a toy, but absence, the hollow space where a child should be. It distills the entire tragedy into one haunting image: arms wrapped around what remains, eyes searching for what is gone. And so, the question lingers: What if Cuddle Cat could speak? Would it reveal that Madeleine never left the apartment alive? Would it absolve her parents, confirming it was nothing more than a misunderstood relic of grief? Or would it remain silent, reminding us that some mysteries resist every attempt to solve them? 18 years later, that silence still echoes. Forensic files gather dust, police files open and close, suspects rise and fall. But the image endures, Kate McCann clutching a pink stuffed toy before the world, caught between innocence and suspicion. In that silence lies the tragedy of the Madeleine McCann case, not in words, but in the stillness of a child's toy that may or may not have carried the truth all along.